Look at the role that the media has played in the deliberate crucifixion of black leaders. I'm going to name a few, and then I want you to see how crucifixion is done. Then I'm coming to Michael and why he was crucified. Denmark Vesey. There was a plot that called for his group of slaves and free blacks to slay their owners and temporarily seize the city of Charleston, South Carolina. They planned to sail to Haiti to escape retaliation because they were impressed with the revolution that took place in Haiti with Toussaint Louverture and Dessalines. Two slaves opposed to Vesey's scheme leaked the plot. See, there's always a Negro somewhere to tell massa what the slaves were planning for their freedom. Charleston authorities charged 131 men with conspiracy. 67 men were convicted and 35 hanged, including Denmark Vesey. But the worst of those was Nat Turner. Now, Nat Turner was our first great military leader. He was a preacher, but he understood aspects of the Bible that preachers today don't seem to want to preach anymore. But his 1831 insurgency in Virginia numbered more than 70 enslaved and free blacks. Approximately 60 white men, women, and children were killed before Turner was defeated. In retaliation, the white militia killed at least 200 blacks and probably many more. Hysteria arose about armies of slaves rising up, and it led to the slaughter of many blacks all over the South under circumstances of great barbarity. Well, they severed the heads of those that they captured, and their heads were mounted on poles at crossroads as a grisly form of intimidation. 48 blacks were tried on charges of conspiracy, insurrection, and treason. 55 were executed, many more were banished, and a few were acquitted. Nat Turner eluded capture for months before he was arrested. He was tried, convicted, and sentenced to death. He was hanged on November the 11th, 1831 in Jerusalem, Virginia. Now let's become more modern. How many of you have heard of W.E.B. Du Bois? He was a great scholar among us. Du Bois started as a staunch integrationist, like many of us. But later, he echoed a very Garveyite philosophy. W.E.B. Du Bois, that talked about the talented tenth and opposed Booker T. Washington, was also an opponent of Marcus Garvey. He talked about large numbers of American Negroes who in all essential particulars conceived themselves as belonging to the white race. Ooh. Did this bother any of you? Did it touch any of you? He said, such Negroes were ever ready, quote, to flock to white America before they would flock to the brown West Indies or to black Africa or yellow Asia. Blacks, he now thought, should begin to concentrate upon this problem, their economic survival. You know, Du Bois was one of the founders of the NAACP, but the NAACP in its original founding, it was to fight for civil rights, but not economic power among black people. You know that, right? So E.B. Du Bois, once they found that he was growing into this kind of mind and began to write in the Crisis magazine some of his thinking, which I, as a baby, was reading the Crisis magazine by an more enlightened W.E.B. Du Bois, and he began to fuel my fire. Then the whites in the NAACP questioned his emotional stability and his capacity for cooperation. They were suspicious of his motives and called him a danger. They took away his passport. And they literally made black people begin to look at W.E.B. Du Bois with a negative view. W.E.B. Du Bois today is admired by any of us with an ounce of intelligence. When you read this man's growth and development, Garvey died in London. E.B. Du Bois died in Africa, and his body is interred in Ghana. He died developing the history of Africa and African civilization so that our children would read of themselves not as slaves on some master's plantation, but see the greatness of yourself. And because he dared to teach us the greatness of ourselves, he suffered crucifixion. But the worst of it all, until modern times, was done to Paul Robeson. How many of you heard of Paul Robeson? Paul Robeson was a scholar. He was an athlete. He was an actor. He was a singer. And he was loved outside of America, in Europe, and particularly in Russia. Listen. In 1919, J. Edgar Hoover worked on trying to frame Marcus Garvey. Marcus Garvey headed the largest independent black organization in the world. And as Garvey grew, they became frightened because Garvey wanted to connect black people in America to black people in Africa. And that to them was dangerous, so what did they do? They framed him. They arrested him, sentenced him to 5 years in prison. His sentence was commuted, and he was deported in 1927, but Hoover went on to FBI glory because he got rid of Marcus Garvey and the United Negro Improvement Association. Paul Robeson, at the height of his fame, he was an entertainer and activist. He began speaking out against fascism and racism in the United States and abroad. Robeson became a prime target of the United States government during the late 1940s through the late 1950s. His passport was revoked from 1950 to 1958, and he was under surveillance by the FBI and the CIA and by the British MI5 for well over 3 decades until his death in 1976. They hated him for his beliefs in socialism and friendship with the Soviet peoples, and for his efforts to push for anti-lynching legislation. To this day, Paul Robeson's FBI file is one of the largest of any entertainer ever investigated by U.S. intelligence. According to files released under the Freedom of Information Act, Robeson was drugged and neutralized under the CIA's Nazi-inspired MK Ultra mind control program and subjected to abusive levels of electric shocks while in Great Britain as a means to keep him from influencing the U.S. civil rights movement and worldwide anti-imperialist movement during the 1960s. Now look, they focused on black entertainers because black entertainers had money. At that time, blacks were not in the major leagues, just coming into baseball, just coming into football. So black sports people didn't have the money that black entertainers had. Sammy Davis, Mahalia Jackson, Dick Gregory, Eartha Kitt, Nina Simone, of course Burt Lancaster, Frank Sinatra, Harry Belafonte, Tony Bennett, Bill Cosby, Diane Carroll, Count Basie, Sidney Poitier, and many others. These were black people and white people who wanted to see black people free. These black people donated their money to movements. And these were some of the strong supporters of Martin Luther King, and we'll get to his crucifixion in just a minute. Now, the prophecy says that any one of us who could connect us to the outside world was deemed a major threat. Garvey, Du Bois, Malcolm, Martin, Elijah Muhammad. Now, do you think that Marcus Garvey was a small-time leader who didn't think about preparing future leaders? Do you think Martin King was like that? These were intelligent black men who knew their mortality. And they knew that if movement was going to continue, they would have to prepare a new cadre of leadership. So here's how crucifixion goes. They nail your hands, they nail your feet. They strip you of your followers by propaganda. They break your legs so that after you are dead, there's no support for your ideas. It's not the man as much as it is the ideas of that man, so they must not only kill the man, they have to kill his idea so that a generation won't come up after him fueled by his ideas. Are you with me? There's Malcolm. There's Martin. There's Kwame Ture. Stokely Carmichael, his former name, is the Panther Party. Now they even started spying on the NAACP because they couldn't trust that among the NAACP leadership somebody wouldn't come up with ideas that whites who pay money to it would not be have an objection to. So they watched all black organizations. Now who is the they? Who is the they?